Good morning, everyone. It is good to be with you again. I hope you are all well. I thought maybe this morning that we would study together from 1 Kings chapter 19 and look into the life of Elijah. Now, you probably are familiar with a bit of background about Elijah concerning the extraordinary miracle that God performs on Mount Carmel, where Elijah calls out the false prophets of Baal. And there's this contest, really, of bringing sacrifices, right? And all of the prophets bring their sacrifice, and Elijah brings his, and they decide that whichever God consumes that sacrifice is the one true God. And we know that God not only consumes that sacrifice, but all of the stones and the wood around the sacrifice that have been just immersed in water, that there's this no doubt that God is the God. And Elijah's just coming from that experience, and he's confronted Ahab. And at the end of chapter 18 of 1 Kings, you see where Elijah is hopeful that King Ahab now will stop this nonsense of leading Israel into worshiping Baal, that he would turn back. And yet in 1 Kings 19 we see that that doesn't happen. And so in the life of Elijah there comes this devastation and really this depression of, I did what I was supposed to do. There was this supernatural moving of God, and now nothing. What I thought would happen, what I thought would be the reaction, what I thought would be the response, just didn't happen. And so we're going to look into this and see what God has to say to Elijah about all of it. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 1. Now Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Now you'll remember that Jezebel is the queen Jezebel married to King Ahab. She's a very godless woman, very cruel, very evil. Ahab does not go back to her and say, you're not going to believe what happened and God showed up and did all this. Oh, no. No, he lets her know, you're not going to believe what Elijah did. He killed all of the prophets of Baal. And she's angry beyond anger. Verse 2. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me, and even more, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. So Jezebel is threatening to kill Elijah in the same way that he had put to death all of the false prophets. She was going to kill him by the sword. That was her promise, really, to Elijah. And Elijah does something that he's not done up to this point. He runs in fear. Now, up till now, if you go back to chapter 17 and 18, you will see that Elijah is a man who seeks God's face, constantly praying, constantly waiting on a word from God. But this time he doesn't. He knows the power that Jezebel carries. And Jezebel, even though she's queen, she's really king and queen over Israel at this point. And Ahab does what she says. And so he runs in fear. Look at verse 3. And he, meaning Elijah, was afraid and arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die, and said, "It is enough." So he runs for his life, fearful, leaving out of the area that God had given him to minister in Israel, and comes to a portion of Judah. So he's out of the boundaries. He's out of the realm he has been given by God to minister to. And he runs. And then he sits underneath this juniper tree and he just says, I'm done. It's enough. I did what you told me to do, God. I saw you move. And if that's not going to change people, what in the world will? And it's enough. Could you just take my life now? I'm weary now. I just want to go home now. Here's what God says. Middle of verse 4. Now, O Lord, take my life, for I'm not better than my fathers. He lay down and slept under the juniper tree, and behold, there was an angel touching him. And the angel said, Arise, eat. Then he looked, and behold, there was at his head bread cake, baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. So he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now here is Elijah sitting under the juniper tree. It's enough. I'm done. Take my life. And then he falls asleep. And while he's sleeping, an angel of the Lord comes. Now, you're probably familiar with the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament was Jesus Christ. And he comes and he ministers to Elijah, and there's bread and there's water and there's this supernatural caring for Elijah in this time of Elijah's ministry that is so daunting for him. And he says, for you, the journey's too great. But it's never too great for God, is it? Whatever ministry you've been given, whatever task has been laid at your feet by the Lord, it's too much for you. It's too much for me, but it's not too much for him. And so he comes and he ministers to Elijah, and Elijah goes in the strength of that for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, this idea of 40 days and 40 nights might be very familiar to us. It's used multiple times in the Old Testament. And a parallel passage for us here in 1 Kings can be seen also in Exodus, where Moses and the Israelites are in the wilderness 40 years, right? Not just 40 days, and that's 40 years wandering around. God's making provision for them. And then they come to the Mount of Sinai. Now, Mount Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. It's the same mountain. And here comes Elijah to the same mountain. But watch what he does. Look at verse 9. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 9. Then he came there to a cave and lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Isn't that the question sometimes? God just wants to know, what are you doing here? Why are you here when you're supposed to be here, right? Elijah wasn't supposed to be where he was in this cave, hiding out, fearing for his life. God had given him a ministry in Israel to the idol worshipers. And he was to be rooting that out and confronting that. And here he was hiding away in this cave. And God just says, "What are you doing here?" And it occurred to me as I was studying this, it's not just, why are you here? But if you key on the word, what are you doing here? There's only one answer for Elijah. What are you doing? Nothing. Because there's nothing to do in a cave by yourself with no one there. There's no one to minister to. There's nothing for you to be doing. Can I just say to all of us during this time of fear that's going on with COVID and the isolation that we seem to be going through, what are we doing? And the answer is probably nothing. Versus, what should we be doing? I just want to say to you ladies, there is something for us to be doing. There are people to be ministering to. The universal church ought to be doing. We must do. We must serve. We must share the gospel. That cannot change for us, even though there is fear. And God was letting Elijah know, fear or no fear. People responding or them not responding doesn't change the message, doesn't change the gospel. What are you doing? Here's what happens. Verse 10. Elijah said, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away." He doesn't answer the question, does he? When God says, "What are you doing?" he didn't ask, "What have you done?" He didn't say, "What good have you done in the past?" He says, "What are you currently doing?" Verse 11. So God said, "Go forth, stand on the mountain before the Lord." And behold, the Lord was passing by, and a great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire a sound of a gentle blowing. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Now I want to point out several things here because this is packed, and I hope you'll stay with me. Number one, God told him to go out onto the mountain, but he doesn't do it. If you'll see here in verse 13, he's still in the cave. God says, "Go out to the mountain." Elijah doesn't go. But out there on the mountain, God is in control of everything. He's in control of the wind and the earthquake and the fire. He owns it. He controls it, right? He commands it. And he's showing his glory. And yet, God wasn't in all of that drama, all that dramatic stuff. Sometimes God takes all that to move his people, but then sometimes just that quiet voice that God is in. And Elijah comes out, and God asks him again, "What are you doing here?" And there Elijah stands, wrapped in his mantle. "What are you doing here?" Verse 14. Elijah answers again, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left. They seek my life to take it." Again, Elijah will not answer the question. God did not ask him, "What have you done?" He said, "What are you doing?" That's the question for us, ladies. God knows what we've done and what we've not done. But the question to us this morning is, what are you doing? And I have to say to you that the big reason for this devotion this morning is I had to ask myself, what are you doing, Christy? Do you just love your time, your me time, which that's a whole nother devotion, which drives me insane? Or do you really want to serve? Do you really want to help? So when we ask ourselves this morning, what are we doing? Let's go to the Lord and really answer that. Asking the Holy Spirit to search our hearts. What am I doing, God? What do you want me to do? If you finish reading that passage, you'll know that God sent Elijah back. He sent Elijah back to anoint another king of Israel, to anoint another king of Judah, and to anoint the man who would follow Elijah, another prophet who we know is Elisha. There was work to be done. Ladies, there's work to be done. There are women who are hurting. There are people without the truth in a very fearful time. Are we going to lock ourselves away in our caves, right? Our homes? Or are we going to serve? God doesn't want to know what you've done. He really wants to know what you're doing. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? And seek God's face in what we ought to be doing. I'd like for each of you to know that my door is open, and I welcome you guys to just come and sit on the couch, drink some coffee or tea with me, and let's have in-person Bible study. I'm so ready for that. I miss you guys on Sunday morning. We are serving in another church at this time, but we miss you all and hope to be back with you soon. I am teaching youth and children on Wednesday night at Mount Pleasant, and pray that your children will come and time of Bible study and fellowship. Don't hide away in that cave, girls. Let's get out there and get going. God wants to know, what are we doing?